Good morning, everyone. You're all very welcome to this morning's webinar on getting on board with sustainability, a board member perspective. Just before we begin, I'd like to point out that the webinar is being recorded for archive purposes. My name is Orla Linehan, and I'm an assistant professor in governance and sustainability at the 𝐓𝐡𝐢𝐧𝐤𝐢𝐧𝐠 School of Business and Economics in University of Galway. We're really delighted to have you all here this morning, and we can tell by the high numbers that are attending this morning that this is a really important and relevant topic for many boards and organisations. I will introduce you to all of my panellists in a minute, but we would like to kick off the webinar with two short poll questions, just to get a sense of the challenges and the difficulties that those of you in the audience are currently facing when it comes to sustainability. So the poll questions should appear for you now in a minute. And we would really appreciate if you could take a minute to answer both of the questions. So the first question is, do you view sustainability as more of a risk or an opportunity for your organisation? So you should be able to go into polls and quizzes down at the bottom of your screen. And you will see the first question. Do you view sustainability as more of a risk or an opportunity for your organisation? And I'll leave you answer that question first. We'll give it maybe another 20, 30 seconds. And we will present the results of that. And we will touch on the second question then. So I see people are also answering the second question. So if you have managed to answer the first question, if you see sustainability as more of a risk or an opportunity, and then the second question, which of the following do you find most challenging in leading your organization through the sustainability transition? So what is the most challenging for you? Is it getting management or employee buy-in for sustainability initiatives? Getting board support for the sustainability strategy? Understanding the complexities of environmental and social issues, navigating the sustainability disclosure requirements, or integrating sustainability into organizational strategy. So several challenges there, and we're curious to see what you find the most challenging that you're facing at the moment in your organizations. So we let the poll run for another couple of seconds. People are still answering the questions, and then we can get a sense of what are the issues that are currently facing you. So if we just take a look at the first more broad question, do you view sustainability as more of a risk or an opportunity for your organization? Really pleasing here to see that 88% of you view sustainability as an opportunity. And the remaining participants see sustainability as a risk. Now, it's quite the case that you see it as both a risk and an opportunity, which of course it is, but nice to see a very positive attitude around viewing sustainability as an opportunity. And we will discuss that a little bit more during the discussion around how you can move from that risk compliance mindset to a more strategic opportunity mindset. In terms of the challenges that you're facing at the moment when it comes to sustainability in your organizations, there are two maybe key challenges here that people are facing. The first is option C there, understanding the complexities of environmental and social issues. So many members of the audience are struggling with that. Almost half of the audience are struggling with understanding, general understanding of environmental and social issues. And a good number of the audience also struggling with integrating sustainability into the organizational strategy. Okay, so 46% of participants are finding it difficult to understand environmental and social issues, and 39% of the audience are struggling with integrating sustainability into strategy. So I'll end the poll at that, and thank you for answering your questions on it. Just share the results with you there on the screen. That gives us a real good sense of what your issues are and what maybe topics you'd like us to touch on and discuss this morning. So we'll certainly try and address those issues for you. I'd like to now go and introduce my panelists to you this morning. So this morning joining us, we have firstly Deirdre Ryan. Deirdre is Director of Sustainability and Quality Assurance in Bord Bia. Deirdre is responsible for the development of Ireland's national quality assurance and sustainability programmes for the agri-food sector. She serves as a member of the Board of Sport Ireland, and she sits on the subcommittees for high performance, women in sport, and chairs the grants and eligibility subcommittee. Deirdre holds an MSc in Business Sustainability and an MBS in International Business from University College Dublin. Even more impressive, though, is that Deirdre is an Irish Olympian, having competed in the high jump at the London 2012 Olympics. So very welcome, Deirdre, and thank you for this. Next, we have Neil Fitzgerald, who's Head of Ethics and Governance for Chartered Accountants Ireland. Neil also serves as a non-executive director with current board roles in a mid-sized Irish charity and a pension scheme. Neil is co-founder of Chapter Zero Ireland and an advisory member on several global professional accountancy committees and task forces. Neil is a chartered accountant, and he also holds a number of qualifications from University of Galway, University College Dublin, and University of Cambridge. So we know who all the sustainability reporting questions will be directed to this morning. Thank you, Neil, for joining us. Next, we have Dr. Margaret Cullen. Margaret holds a PhD in governance from University College Dublin. She is governance advisor to the Institute of Directors in Ireland, Programme Director of UCD Smurfit's Executive Diploma in Corporate Governance, and Academic Director for the Institute of Banking's Certified Bank Director Programme. Margaret serves as a non-executive director on the boards of several organisations, and she has extensive board and board committee experience. Welcome and thank you, Margaret. And lastly, we have Barry Gavin, who has over 20 years' experience in sustainable finance and development as both a C-suite executive and a non-executive board member. Barry currently holds a number of non-executive board positions, including independent chair of the board, chair of the Audit and Risk Committee, and independent non-executive director. Barry is a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants. He holds an MBA from Dublin City University, and he is a member of the Institute of Directors. So thank you, Barry, and thank you all panelists. So just before we begin the discussion, just a reminder to the audience that if any questions pop into your mind as we're going through our discussion, please feel free to pop your questions into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And we will endeavour to allocate time to address as many of your questions as possible at the end of the discussion. So with that in mind, we'll kick off the discussion, and I'm going to start with you, Barry, and apologies for springing this on you this morning, but I wanted to get your thoughts on some recent research that was carried out. Now, this research was carried out with directors of large publicly listed companies. And the recent survey findings suggest that now only 47% of public company boards have sustainability as a regular agenda item. So what that's saying is that less than half of these large public company boards are looking at sustainability on a regular basis. And that has actually fallen from 55% in the space of just 2 years. And I suppose the relevance of me stating that finding this morning is that there are likely many members out there in the audience this morning thinking now, well, if the boards of the largest global public companies are not looking at sustainability on a regular basis, then why should I? Should I be concerned with it when many of our audience members are likely part of much smaller organizations? So what I want to ask you, Barry, is, do you think sustainability should be a regular agenda item on the board's agenda? Do boards have a role to play here, or should they simply keep their fingers out and let management get on with it? What is your view on that?
Yeah, thanks for the notice on that question, Orla. Appreciate that. As it happened, I actually saw, I think if you were talking about the same thing, I saw that it was in the Harvard Business Review. And I think in that context, I think context is important. I think there was a very much US focus on that, and I think
very good. Yeah.
ESG and sustainability, there is quite a polarized view between how they think about it in the US and how they think about it in Europe. But let's park that for the moment as an issue. Should it be on the agenda, and what's the role? To me, I like to think of it in sort of simple terms. When I think of the role of independent directors and the board more generally, I look at it under two headings. One would be the performance heading, and another would be the conformance heading. And when I talk about performance, it's about a key role for the board is reviewing and improving the strategy, and then supporting and the management team in delivering that and holding them accountable for delivering. And then on the conformance side, it's about being comfortable with the risk management process, the monitoring of risks, looking at internal control frameworks, and also the obligations from a legal and regulatory perspective. So if I bring that sort of as the lens through which I would look at sustainability and look at the role of the board, then when we think about sustainability, and sustainability is a very, very broad agenda. We talk about environmental, social, and governance, and even within those headings, it can mean different things to different organizations from a materiality perspective. But there's no doubt, as we transition to a more sustainable world, it's probably the single biggest economic risk that's going to face any organization, and the business as usual model isn't going to be sustainable and viable into the long term. So therefore, to me, it falls very squarely under the performance and conformance role of the board. So what is the long-term strategy? Because the business as usual model is not going to be economically viable as you move forward. So how are management thinking about the business model from a strategic perspective, taking into consideration that the transition is going to take place? And, your question at the start was around risks and opportunities. So what are the key risks? And, I'm a real fan of the TCFD framework and the headings that are around governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. And using that, we talk about transition risks and we talk about physical risks. So every organization, and I think this is the thing about sustainability, it has different meanings for different organizations in terms of materiality and impact. But I think if you look at it through the role of the board on one hand and the challenge that it presents both from a risk and an opportunity perspective, then to me it absolutely has to be on the agenda of every board. And the role of the board is this is to me is just another risk that faces the business. Going back to our academic days, we talked about Porter's 5 forces model. There's lots of models out there for looking at risk, and for me, this is just another risk, and therefore needs to be taken in that same light. So yeah, absolutely. And I think the role of the board falls under either of those two headings, Ola.
Okay, thank you, Barry. So you're saying it is important, and it's really a key function of the board's oversight responsibility. But let me push you a little bit here, because what if I said to you that there are many, many board members around Ireland at the moment that have had sentiments along the lines of the following when it comes to sustainability. It's just not relevant to our sector. We are too small for this. We have conflicting priorities. I don't have time for this. These are genuine sentiments from board directors, from executives around small organizations in Ireland. So there's clearly a challenge here between competing priorities. There's a tension. Sustainability is competing with a host of other risks and opportunities. So with such limited time, how does the board ensure that sustainability does not simply fall off the agenda if it is that important? What are the practical things that a board can do to make sure that it stays firmly front and center?
Yeah. Well, if I take, the first 2 points you made is it's not relevant to us and potentially that we're too small. I think what I've seen over the last, particularly 18 to 24 months, is the sustainability agenda has moved from sort of being on the sidelines to coming front and center. And, if an organization did a stakeholder map and looked at the key stakeholders, it's everything from the board to the customers, employees, lenders, shareholders, the general community, and actually understood how they're thinking about sustainability. I think what you'll find is all of the key stakeholders are talking about sustainability. So, for example, if you're a B2B business, you're in somebody's supply chain, and therefore you're part of, if you just look at it through the environmental lens, you're part of their Scope 3 emissions. So while it may not have impact on you directly, as particularly for countries based or companies based in Europe through the new reporting obligations, you're either going to have to report on your emissions, or they're going to be measuring themselves against their own target. So just because you necessarily are a small organisation doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to be caught. What we're seeing then on the lending side, for example, just take another stakeholder, which is the banks. The banks, the majority of their scope comes under what's called financed emissions, which is how they're lending their capital. And central banks are putting huge pressure on the banking community to understand and to stress test their loan book. So anybody who's applying for a loan recently at a corporate level will understand the level of scrutiny there is around sustainability. And go back to the customer side, I'm seeing on the procurement as well that more and more marks, in some cases up to 15% mark of the marks for in procurement are being awarded for sustainability. So if companies think it's not relevant or that they're too small, I think they're missing the bigger picture. And I have had situations where with advisors, where they anecdotally have evidence of customers of their ringing up and saying, listen, I'm in a procurement process. I need to have a transition plan. How do I do it? Can you help me to do it? And by the way, I only have 24 hours to do this. So, I think it's naive to think that it's not relevant to you. I don't think size is an issue. And I think it's important that people sort of educate themselves. I think this is one of the challenges, is for boards to understand what it means. And at the start, it means different things to different organizations. So this concept of materiality, what's material to the organization will differ. But I think at a business level, it certainly is coming down the tracks at a pace. I mean, that train has left the station. And I think it's important that everybody gets on board as soon as possible.
Okay. Thank you, Barry. Can I turn to you, Margaret? Because I think the message that we're getting from Barry is that this is a really important topic that boards need to address and need to grapple with. And particularly, the example he gave of, you might need a transition plan within 24 hours. Now, if that is the case, then that presents a huge concern to those of us who might I refer to you and me maybe as governance nerds. And it presents a concern because here's another piece of interesting research, this time carried out in Ireland by the Institute of Directors just 2 years ago. And it revealed at the time that there was significant sustainability knowledge gaps amongst directors at board level. One of the findings in the survey was that Irish directors that were surveyed at the time had not undertaken ESG director training within the previous 12 months. And furthermore, very few boards were actually factoring ESG into the skills matrix for new board directors. Can I ask you, Margaret, based on your lots of experience with boards and engaging with directors, is this what you're seeing on the ground in practice? Do you think there is a knowledge gap or a sustainability competence gap amongst directors? Or is it maybe particular to just certain organizations and certain industries? What are you seeing on the ground?
Well, look, I think Orla, to answer that question, if I may, I probably could kind of steer in a particular direction. I think that we have to be very careful not to overemphasize the level and depth of sustainability knowledge needed at board level, because a lot depends on the organization's context and also on your governance philosophy. Okay, so what I'm seeing is that it varies, and it varies much dependent on this organizational context, Orla. So let me start with that. So say, for example, an organization, perhaps an SME, is trying to find their way, and Barry's alluded to this. They're not sure if it will impact them from a commercial opportunity or risk perspective. They may decide in those circumstances to co-opt sustainability knowledge onto the board to support the collective board and indeed management in identifying the opportunities, threats, and so on, and to advise and guide. So I suspect, for any organisation, it's very difficult to say, if I put my arms around the SME sector, there isn't enough knowledge at board level, because it really depends on what they have at managerial level and what they need at board level. As you pivot into kind of larger organisations, Orla, those directly impacted by, EU action plans, related directives such as CSRD, CSDDD, they'll have strong internal sustainability skills. That is below board level. And in the same way, at board level, that we don't need to be an engineer to be on the board of Ryanair, strong systems of internal governance beneath the board and hiring the right sustainability executive talent means that the depth of sustainability knowledge at board level should be such to enable direction and oversight like it is for any other aspect of strategy formulation, execution and related risk management. So again, a board or management might consider co-opting adaptive expertise in sustainability to advise and guide, but also might see it valuable and indeed almost brand enhancing. That's a slightly different issue, Orla. So otherwise, the board as a collective needs a level of understanding, and this kind of links in very much to what Barry has said, a level of understanding commensurate with the sustainability play and the level of internal expertise. So the board needs to understand the EU action plan or that policy architecture and where the company fits in within this architecture. So picking up on Barry's point, any organisation needs to understand stakeholder expectations, including suppliers or companies that it supplies with regard to sustainability, including what data they need from the company, and it needs a clear guidance from management on that in providing a product or service on what sustainability factors impact value creation and what aspects of product and service delivery and value creation impact the environment and society. And it's a very difficult question to answer universally, Orla, because it really depends on context. And I spent a lot of time educating myself about the EU Action Plan and the objectives of directors. I'm not a climate expert. Exec ed programs out there, they should, if they're well designed, will understand important learning outcomes for boards, not necessarily the granularity of the science, but it is the organizational context that boards must also fully understand, and management have a key role here. So if that expertise doesn't exist within the business, Orla, they need to make sure that it does. But actually, if you indulge me for a second, Orla, I will mention the philosophy of governance, because anyone who's been in a classroom with me will know that I'm more of a stewardship theorist than an agency theorist, Orla. So I often hear people say you need sustainability expertise at board or non-exec director level to second guess and challenge management. I've mentioned advice and guidance, which is a pivotal role of the board, often ignored. But oversight, it's about creating accountability in a constructive way. It's not about second guessing. So we need the collective strength of the board to enable it to ensure the governance architecture is built, again, building on what Barry has said, including the capacity to identify and manage the opportunities, the risks attached to strategic execution, and the extent to which the board gets assurance on strategic execution for a given level of acceptable risk, including, and this is key, the controls in which it relies. So it's critical to some, Orla, that we look at the entire system of governance and related capabilities internally to assess the level of sustainability expertise we need at the board. And I would not be an advocate to say one person on every board, regardless of context, should be a sustainability in-depth expert. I wouldn't be advocating for that, but we need to understand what we need to know to oversee.
Okay. Can I pick you up on that very last point there? Because, there is a lot of talk about, should you appoint one sustainability expert director on the board, or, is this a general business issue that really you want your entire board to get, a certain level of education and training on?
Oh, I think it's a collective board issue. Look, as I said at the outset, Orla, you're going to look at your context. So if I'm joining a board, and going to Barry's point, and that board is within a supply chain where this is becoming really pertinent, you've got to assess as a board, do we have the internal expertise? And remember, governance is a system. The board has a pivotal role, but the day-to-day execution, the day-to-day formulation of sustainable strategies and the related risk management is going to be presented to the board for critical evaluation. So we need that expertise within the organisation. Depending on your size, I always draw a continuum in class, or from my startup right through to my listed company. And depending on where you are in that continuum will dictate whether you need to co-opt that onto a board on which management can leverage, or whether you need to you've got that internally, and what we need is a good collective board knowledge to say, okay, have we got a handle on this? Do we understand the opportunities, risks? Do we understand stakeholder expectations? Going to Barry's earlier point. So I think it's very much dependent on context, and I think that's really, really important. We can rush it, and I'm a firm believer. I've mentioned the example of Ryanair, or I could join the board of Ryanair tomorrow. I don't need to be able to dismantle and take apart an engine. What I need to be able to show is that there's core tenets of governance principles and we need to adopt them. I think understanding that external architecture of both regulatory policy and stakeholder expectation is key. And we can't fall down the rabbit hole that Barry has said. You're asked to, you're filling out some procurement request, and you can't answer the basic questions. So you need to be ready for that.
And I mean, maybe just to follow up there, I mean, I'm getting the sense from you that really that collective understanding across the board is certainly much more effective. But there might be members in the audience out there this morning that might feel that they are actually the sole sustainability champion on their board. It's quite possible that they are in what might be called a polarized board, and that they might be facing many tensions and challenges when it comes to even trying to get sustainability onto the board agenda, trying to give it sufficient attention. And I've no doubt maybe facing debates around the trade-off between sustainability initiatives and, of course, the bottom line and financial returns. Would you have any practical tips or suggestions for any members of the audience out there this morning that are maybe trying to navigate the board dynamics and the board tensions around sustainability?
Oh, look, when I join a board, Orla, the first thing I want to be very clear on is there agreement on the company's purpose? And in my experience, and if there isn't, you need to go back to the drawing board and really focus on this, because in my experience, defining company purpose ensures that you attract directors drawn to that purpose. And this helps hugely to navigate sustainability in the face of multiple external masters and indeed internal, conflicts of opinion. When we have clarity of purpose, the board and management, when formulating strategy, including sustainability strategy, yeah, sure, we still have to work to align on what it means from a strategic formulation and risk appetite. But that healthy tension should ensure the board is making good decisions. Some really tidy piece of research that I used in class this year, Orla, is Professor Mervyn King's 6 Ways for Boards to Lead a Sustainability Transition. It's a publication with Accountancy Europe. And Accountancy Europe, they interviewed several informed practitioners and recorded insights and examples to inspire, I suppose, the sustainability transition. And the interviews had made it clear that efforts to do a sustainability report starts with a collective mind of the board in relation to company purpose. Okay, so be clear about your purpose, define it with precision. And if you look at corporate governance codes, whether it's the UK Corporate Governance Code in the UK for listed companies, or indeed the Euronext Code for Irish listed companies, which is very much a kind of cut and paste of that, effective board defines its company purpose and sets its strategy to deliver it. A company's purpose is the reason for which it exists, and that well-defined purpose and going back to the drawing board and being clear on it will help companies articulate their business model, including with regard to sustainability, develop their strategy, operating practices and approach to risk. So I firmly believe that a board that's clear about its purpose, Orla, and the corporate culture needed to deliver that purpose often finds it easier to engage with each other at board level, engage with shareholders and wider stakeholders. And so for me, it's about going back to that purpose.
Okay, thanks, Margaret. I'm going to pivot a little bit because we've talked, I suppose, a lot at board level. But I think that if a board is really going to successfully oversee an organization's sustainability strategy, and you just touched on this point, Margaret, that they need to have a good relationship with management around what's the purpose of the organization, is sustainability embedded in the purpose and in the culture and in the values. I'm going to turn to you, Deirdre, because I suppose you currently sit on both sides of the fence, so to speak. So you are Director of Sustainability and Quality Assurance in Bord Bia, but you're also a member of the Board of Sport Ireland. I'd like if you could maybe share with our audience this morning, maybe your insights from both sides and both of these experiences. Maybe start with your experience from management or executive level. How important is it to have that support and buy-in from your board? Is there regular communication? How does that work and what does that look like in practice?
Great, thanks. Yeah, and a lot of what has been said already really resonates in terms of the context of that board. But certainly, it's having the board buy-in certainly sets the tone. It sets the tone for legitimizing the plans and programs, and it kind of also, I suppose, allocates resources, funding, looking at that almost financial resources as well. If you have, and one of the big challenges now that we need to move well beyond incremental sustainability to transformational sustainability to face the challenges that we're in from a climate crisis, biodiversity crisis, and social issues. So we can no longer kind of rely on that 1 year, 2 year, 3 year timelines. We're the executives, the management teams need much longer term timelines and opportunities to have that payback in a longer term perspective. So without that, I mean, and it's the job of the board to, have that oversight and determine that long term direction. So that interaction is essential. I think the other thing that really I find it also sets the board's ambition, sets the tone of the CEO, which really influences the entire agenda in the organization. And so, naturally, our CEO and our executive are going to be responding to the questions, and we can all attest to the shifts that happen after a board meeting when certain things have come up, and how direction can change. So look, it's absolutely essential. But I also agree with a lot of what Margaret said. It depends on the organisation and the context as well. And boards have so much. We're all used to the board packs, and time and consideration is difficult at a board level. So as a management team, you really need to be able to tailor your message to the board audience, to be able to communicate your metrics, your targets in a very clear, measurable way. There needs to be a level of understanding as well. There's I think it's Barry that mentioned it earlier. There are so many topics on the sustainability agenda. And even if you're talking about targets and metrics around climate, around emissions, and the board need a level of understanding what you're talking about. Are you talking absolute? Are you talking intensity? What timelines are we talking about? What does good look like? How do we compare to the rest of the industry? What are the opportunities? And all that kind of does take time. So the interaction between management and the board is essential. Having your champions on the board, while the whole board needs a certain level of understanding. So I'm a real proponent of board training around sustainability. We do a lot of executive training for the 350 companies we work with, both small and large, because of those opportunities, because those risks, and because the context in the agri sector that we're in is very different to maybe the sector some of the other panelists are working on. So having that overall level of understanding is important. Having champions on the board really helps as well. So yeah, it's that interaction that is important. But the tone from the top is essential, given the context of the organisation. If you have a really strong team, as Margaret said, a really strong executive team bought into sustainability, and a strong kind of implementation team, you might not need that same level. It can be a little bit more tailored, but yeah, a lot of collaboration essential.
I mean, it strikes me that you're hopefully giving some advice and suggestions out there to the audience this morning around one of the key challenges they said they're facing is to integrate sustainability into strategy. And I think a real key way of doing that is to ensure that there is collaboration, real strong collaboration between board and management. And of course, the other challenge that our members in the audience are having this morning is the general competence around social and environmental issues. And it has come up 3 times now already, the need for that maybe upskilling or education or training. Can I turn to maybe the softer side of this, Deirdre? I suppose, how important is culture here in this, or what role does culture play? Is it important to embed sustainability into an organization's culture and values? If it is important, how do you do that? Maybe what kind of skills and attributes do you need as a leader to try and embed sustainability into the culture of the organization?
Yeah, look, it's very hard to get anything done in an organisation if culture and isn't right.
Culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yeah, as they say, and actually, just a lot of what's been touched upon already in terms of integrating. So I suppose while I've had experience on the kind of the leadership executive side, and also on the board side, I suppose where I started, I was trying to implement the first sustainability strategy in an organisation as a sustainability manager, and culture change and change management was key. And one of the ways, just to add a bit of flavour to that, was that we tried to change the culture, was having that accountability at the top. So what we did was we had the leadership team have each be responsible for a certain area. So not necessarily having their KPIs and bonuses tied to sustainability, but very much the accountability and responsibility shared across that leadership team, and in turn the board. So that really top down, but then really addressing things from a bottom up approach. So making sure that the teams understand sustainability on the ground level, be that in a retail, be that in a factory, and translating, I think, the message around sustainability to be really practical, what you can do, what steps you can take, be it stickers on doors for energy efficiency, up to, you know, very board level KPIs and accountability. So the culture piece is important. It needs to be part of almost the parlance of the organization, that sustainability conversations are integrated into discussions. As Margaret said, that, you know, the purpose is relooked at. Is the purpose fit for purpose? Do you need a separate sustainability strategy purpose, or is that encompassed? And for certain companies, their whole entire purpose might have a sustainability focus. But if not, is there kind of a secondary sustainability purpose that the organization has that people can buy into? Relooking at your values, do they integrate, do they align to your sustainability goals as well? So embedding in sustainability into the organization will do a lot for culture. And look, I think even then the training piece, integrating, one of the really helpful things we found is having sustainability training part of your leadership development. So people want to go up, be promoted onto a leadership position in an organization, that sustainability is a key part of that. So performance management as well, integrating it into your PDPs, your PGPs. So it's really looking at the way the operational model of the organization as well, and taking a sustainability lens and making sure it's integrated. Because if it sits in one element of the organization, if it becomes compliance, it becomes, you know, and increasingly with CSRD, sustainability is in the first instance becoming a little bit of a headache, because it's around data collection, it's around compliance, and we need to ensure that doesn't take over, that it is very much seen as that opportunity that it is.
Yeah, no, super, Deirdre. And you know, I might come back to you if we've time, and you can share maybe some insights on the Origin Green program, and you know, and maybe how you're moving the dial on that, I suppose, a little bit more. But we will turn in a minute to the audience, maybe for some questions. So if you want to be thinking about some questions, and popping some questions into the Q&A, we'll get to them in 3 or 4 minutes. But Neil, I'd like to turn to you, because I think we would be completely failing in our duties if we didn't have at least a small discussion on the sustainability reporting regulations. And given that Deirdre has just given us a segue into that, you know, we can see from our audience this morning that there are a number of members of the audience that are struggling with the reporting regulations. And I'd like you to maybe tell us, I suppose, just from your own negotiations and communication with stakeholders, what kind of challenges are organizations facing at the moment in terms of trying to comply with sustainability reporting requirements? And maybe secondly, along with the challenges, could you maybe help our audience by giving maybe some suggestions on how they might overcome some of those challenges and what they might do? Thanks, Neil.
Sure, yeah. It just occurred to me there are 3 accountants on this panel, so it might be slightly biased. But yeah, look, what is the biggest challenge organizations out there who are actually applying sustainability reporting requirements at the moment? Data. Okay, so it's getting the data, cleaning the data, verifying the data, assuring the data, collating the data, reporting the data. Okay, the second challenge I would say would be the kind of, and I'm going to join the dots, because Barry, Margaret and Deirdre have already said this in their own way, and I'm just going to join the dots. But this thing called double materiality assessment might actually make everyone's life easy. And I'm delighted Margaret mentioned that Accountants Europe publication. I'm a member of the Accountants Europe's Corporate Governance Policy Group, and we commissioned that publication on the 6 questions boards to lead a sustainable transition. But when you look at what is said in that report, it's talking about common sense actions. about kind of engaging with the stakeholders, breaking down silos. But then one of them I really like, it's using the double materiality tool as a strategic tool. So sometimes people look at corporate reporting, they look at accounting, they look at sustainability reporting as something technical over here that I have to do, kind of in that conformance arena that Barry was talking about. It's kind of looking backwards and we just got to go and verify, do a report and send it in and move on. Whereas it's different with sustainability reporting. Sustainability reporting does not start with a trial balance, okay? It starts with actually what you're doing. So you look at what you're doing and you say to yourself, okay, this is what I'm going to report. But the lens through which you decide what to report is the exact same lens any reasonable entrepreneur, board director would use in terms of looking at their strategy. Where can I achieve impact? Where can I further my purpose? Where can I make money if that's your objective? Okay. So it's kind of that double materiality assessment, which all falls back on what Margaret said, the context of the organization. That's the very first step in setting double materiality. And once you've understood the context of the organization, what you're about, where you want to be and where you're going and how you're going to get there, then and only then you start looking at kind of the sustainability matters. You did a survey, a poll at the start, Orla, and it didn't surprise me that the top rated, and question 2, the issue most people had was with the complexity of environmental and social issues. So I'd just like to break that down a second. This is not rocket science. There's nobody in the audience here that does not have some sustainability expertise. It is not all about scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions. That is just one sustainability matter in relation to climate change. Okay, that's one issue. Some organizations will have a big impact there. Some organizations won't. It won't be a material matter for everybody. Okay. Secondly, is what I'd say is when you start looking at the kind of other environmental issues, it's about pollution. So what are you doing with your waste? Talk about circular economy and the recycling of products, etc. Talk about pollution or biodiversity. Again, you may or may not be in that space. But look at the social issues. What are the social issues? It's about your own workforce. It's about equal opportunities. It's about diversity, equality, and inclusion. Who isn't doing that? You know, so there's nothing like it's almost HR expertise when you start looking at your own workforce. And then you start looking at the workforce and the value chain. So if you're an SME, it's just really your own workforce. If you're a large company and you've got global operations and you're using contractors, then yes, you might start looking at workers in the value chain to make sure there's no use of slave labor or forced labor or anything like or human rights violations don't exist. So it's all about context. What is relevant to you? And when you look at governance, bizarrely, governance in the sustainability reporting arena is not any of the things Margaret said about good governance principles. That's what you'd expect it to be, okay? But that's taken as a given. All right. It's taken as a given that you can govern your organization, how it's run. The governance elements in the sustainability reporting regime is about kind of anti-bribery and corruption measures. What are your whistleblowing and speaking up procedures? And suddenly when you start looking at what the issues are, you start going, yeah, we got that, you know, and your board are competent in a lot of those arenas. Management are competent in a lot of those arenas. They're doing it anyway. It's about gathering information, putting it together and reporting it. So I think it's that double materiality assessment. You can't go far wrong by just doing it. It can be difficult to do if you're a large organization. It's not very difficult to do if you're a small organization.
Okay, Neil, because of your really interesting answer, you've now been challenged with a question straight away from the member of the audience.
My doorbell is ringing, Orla.
Yes. So we might, if it's okay, we might turn and try to address some of the questions that are coming in from the audience. And the first one is specifically directed at you, Neil. So you mentioned minimum social safeguards, slave labour. But the question from John Fingleton, thank you for your question, is there guidance on how companies or auditors can verify this? So would you have any practical suggestions for how you verify that data?
Yeah, actually, that's a very good question. How would an auditor go about verifying anything? And I will just take the example of slave labor and minimum safeguard thresholds. There's kind of principles of auditing, okay? So they look for what they call audit evidence. what does audit evidence look like? First of all, audit what does the organization say it's doing? Okay, so what are the organization's policies? What is the thought put in behind those policies? What effort has the organization made to implement those policies? Looking at the internal controls that the organization themselves have put in place in order to ensure slave labor, human rights violations are not happening in their supply chain. Okay, so that's the first place an auditor would look, is at what the organization say they're doing. Second step is the organization then would look to verify that independently. So this is what you say you're doing. We're now going to go off and we're going to independently verify that, depending on the materiality, of course. So they will actually look for third-party documentation. They will look for third-party certification. They might engage in site visits, go along and see for themselves. They might look for corroborating evidence. They might look at what's happening. You have to remember, auditors they don't just have one client. They've got many clients. So they have the benefit of kind of seeing the whole, if you like, and what other organizations are doing. And they'll ask challenging questions kind of outside in. Why aren't you doing this? Or what are you doing about that? Or have you thought about this? And they're kind of corroborating kind of types of evidence that an auditor would look for. Documentation, third-party verification, walkthrough testing, verification in terms of observation, site visits, etc. That's exactly what they'll be using in that example. Funny enough, I was on a conference yesterday and we had Umicore. And Umicore, a listed company in Belgium, they're a massive, big technology materials development company specializing in making batteries. And so a big part of their supply chain are mining companies, and they need nickel and cobalt for making batteries. And they were giving us a very good insight as to what they do in their organization. This is internally now. This isn't the external auditor. So internally within their organization, what they do in order to ensure they're not using forced labor or human rights violations, etc. And funny enough, this might be a reality check, and this might be a surprise. And again, if batteries aren't your thing, look at the chocolate company, Tony Chocolonely, right? There is slave labor being used. There is forced labor being used. These companies have their eyes wide open, and they are very aware that they're balancing, I think Barry, you mentioned about the balancing competing priorities and the challenges for boards. And again, that's dealt with in what Margaret referred to in the 6 questions and the trade-offs. So it's companies cannot always afford to turn their back on suppliers because they're doing something wrong. Now, that's a big, big challenge, big reputational risk there, okay? Instead, what the companies say, well, we can't not use a supplier, otherwise we can't get what we need. So instead of turning our back on them, we're going to actually turn into them. We're going to provide them with the support. We're going to educate them. We're going to partner with them. We're going to get rid of the use of forced labor and slave labor and human rights violations in their operations, etc. And that's what Umicore were telling us about. So an auditor would also go in to verify that that's happening. Look at the reports, look at the status updates, etc.
Yeah, brilliant, Neil. I really like, how you finished that, because I really believe it is about partnerships and collaborating with your supply chain. Deirdre, can I bring you in?
Yeah, well, I might just jump in and just add, because there's some really good guidance out there as well. Around like business in the community, I think have a modern slavery guidance. There are also just that Neil referred to it, even things like looking at the 𝐓𝐡𝐢𝐧𝐤𝐢𝐧𝐠 platform. That when I was working with a retailer and we did an analysis of our supply chain, and actually 80% of them were on this platform already and had done self-assessments around social compliance because they were supplying into other retailers that had it. So there are some things like that. I would recommend looking at 𝐓𝐡𝐢𝐧𝐤𝐢𝐧𝐠 platform, looking at the business in the community guidance. There's a social compliance audit called the SA 8000. Just if modern slavery in your particular industry does come up as a really material topic, and you're going to be going into that audit process that Neil's referring to with the CSRD or something, you might want to delve deeper. But even within, that's why the materiality approach is really important, and the double materiality approach, as Neil outlined. But even within the human rights space, there will be topics that are more important than others in that. And looking at there's training with for educating your procurement teams with Stronger Together is another organization that has really good guidance on how to train, and awareness videos. What are the things to look out for? Passports, use of certain types of agencies and things like that. So there's even very simple controls you can integrate into your recruitment processes, into your policies. and into your training programs, your compliance training programs that might support you if it is a really material topic.
I mean, I'm really, what I'm getting the sense of from this conversation, and, you know, we kind of had this chat already between ourselves, is that what's really important is to just keep communicating, you know, between each other and helping each other. I mean, this is collaboration, it's not competition. And I think the key thing is that there's lots of resources out there. It's to reach out, ask for help. You know, I heard an interesting analogy this morning that learning sustainability is almost like learning, if you're learning a new language or you're learning a new musical instrument, you'll be the first to say you don't know something when you're trying to learn, or a new sport or something like that. You'll just straight away turn to your coach and say, I don't understand, I don't know what to do. But for some reason, you know, maybe we feel that we're meant to know more about sustainability than we do. And I think that the key to that is to ask the questions, get the support. There is lots of guidance out there, and to keep that conversation going. And I'm going to try and keep going and engage here with a few more questions from the audience. So I might pitch this one at you, Barry, as a first answer, and we can see if anyone else wants to jump in. So we have a question from Roland Kincannon. And this is a really interesting one, and it goes back to what you were saying, Barry, at the very start about context is everything. Do the panel have an opinion on how valid the concept of a generic sustainability expert is, given that sustainability seems to be very specific to different organizations in different contexts? So I think what Ronan is asking is, you know, is there such a thing as a generic sustainability expert? Or you know, is sustainability something that just varies for every organization across the board? What do you think on that, Barry?
Yeah, as been said a couple of times, sustainability is a very, very broad agenda. But if you break it down into the key constituent elements, so if we look at sustainability through the ESG lens, so if you look at environment, we tend to talk about energy, water, waste, biodiversity. So and then you get into the social side, you have similar key headings. So I think a generalist can educate a board on some of the key topics that fit into that agenda. So can talk generally about energy and waste, but specifically as to how it impacts on an organization, I think that will vary. So for some organizations, they may not have a high carbon footprint. They may not have large water usage. They may not have a large waste footprint either. So it varies from organization to organization. So I think there's a general understanding of what the sustainability agenda means. But I think go back to the point earlier on, this concept of materiality. What if those sustainability items are material to the organization? And I think that's where you need some specific knowledge. And as Margaret said earlier on, like one of the roles for the board is you may not need to have the expertise at the board level, but you certainly want to make sure that there's strong internal expertise within the organization itself. So ideally, you'd like somebody to come into the board and say, from a sustainability perspective, you know, here's the key sustainability items that you need to be thinking about as a board, because this is what we're thinking about as an organization in terms of risks and opportunities. So to answer the question, absolutely. I think at a high level, a generalist helps, but I think to understand from a board's perspective, you need to understand specifics from a materiality perspective as to how they impact on the business, both from a risk and an opportunities perspective.
Orla, can I jump in there? Because just on that, experts are rare in this area. And then at that stage as well, I'd say whoever's an expert now may not be an expert tomorrow, because it's an evolving area. Yeah. And we talk about experts being rare. You might want your expert actually in operations rather than on your board. Because on the board, they're a sustainability expert, but the board have to deal with a lot of matters, not just sustainability. And that might be the waste of a valuable board seat. That just might be, you might need people knowledgeable, and you might need people aware. And that's what you want for your board. But probably having an expert there mightn't be the board mightn't be the right seat for the expert. The expert might come in to advise the board and leave again. You know, just an observation or suggestion.
Yeah, I agree with you. I heard another little nugget this morning from Egon Zender, who would place a lot of board members on boards, and they've many organizations coming back to them saying, look, that's brilliant. You found us someone on the board who is great at sustainability, but all of the other 95% of the issues that are affecting our organization, they're not great at it all. So, you know, and I think that was the very start of the conversation was, you know, how do you make sure sustainability is looked at in the agenda as well as all of the other issues that are affecting organizations? I want to just touch on one more question from the audience before we wrap up, if it's okay, because it's quite topical and quite relevant given the environment over the last few days. So a question from Andy McGeady is that Ireland is a European hub for many US headquartered organizations, and there is a tension between sustainability drivers from the US and what might be needed in Ireland and Europe. And of course, given now the election of Donald Trump for a second time, Andy is curious to know what does the panel, how does the panel see this tension developing? You know, as sustainability advocates, should we be concerned about the political landscape maybe in the US now? And I will leave that question open to maybe whoever would like to answer first.
I could start it off by just saying, like, fair enough. Yes, you've got one political agenda in the world that may not be the biggest fan of sustainability. That's fine. The world's a big place. Yes, US is influential. Yes, there's a lot of capital that flows from the US, but those investors are invested in Europe. And Europe, if you look to Europe, Europe has taken the lead in the context of sustainability reporting. Yes, it might be a bit overbearing on the regulatory side, but it's proportionate regulation in terms of not everything applies to everybody. So I'd say, yes, there is probably going to be some tension. There's tension anyway. There's even tension. If you look within Ireland, there's tension. So that's normal, but I don't think it's going to stop. I think Barry said at the start, the train has left the station. That train can't stop. It's gone. I don't think you're going to see, because remember as well, we have global standards, and that's not just the US. In fact, the US were, when we were developing standards, the US were probably, let me just say, the most apprehensive about buying into the global standards. So that's why Europe went ahead and did its own. And then when you look at the global standards that have been developed by the IFRS Foundation, they're not as comprehensive as the European standards. So it's a slower process, I think, on a global perspective. There will be tension, but I don't think it's obviously your organization. Back to this context, if you're a US multinational, bang, yes, you're probably going to be massively impacted. But for everyone else, it just really depends on your exposure to the US market and your dependency on US capital.
I might just add to that briefly if I can, and I think it's a similar point. I think it's disappointing, it's concerning, and you know, for ESG, for you know, pulling out of the climate accord, Paris Agreement, things like that, they're not good signals. But I would fully agree, when you look at the levers and drivers for sustainability, they go, you know, we're operating in a global landscape. We're talking about investors, we're talking about consumers, we're talking about B2B customers who've set ambitious targets. You know, the agenda in other parts of the world, we've seen this. We did a big piece of research 5 years ago on what sustainability means across, you know, the 13 markets where Board B would have offices, and Asia was very much behind. They were talking about foods, you know, it's about safety, quality, not necessarily sustainability. Now we go on trade missions, and you know, Japan, China, it's all about, you know, beyond security of supply, it's around the sustainability. So, you know, the agenda is moving and has moved on. It's going to be, I think it is a blow for sure. Could be, you know, depending on how things go. But yeah, there's many other levers and drivers, yeah, to play with. So hopefully.
Okay, maybe just link to that. I'm going to ask, bring back in just Barry and then Margaret on one last kind of a wrap up question. Maybe to just, if you could just give us a kind of I suppose a key takeaway. It's just quite linked to that conversation. You know, how would you have a suggestion maybe for anyone out there on how they might actually, you know, rather than viewing sustainability as a risk, and certainly the risks that are presenting to us now with the tensions of the US, how could you navigate the sustainability transition to actually be more of a source of value for the organization, and look on this as an opportunity to drive competitive advantage, to drive value, rather than just a box ticking exercise. Maybe Barry first, and then last word to Margaret.
Yeah, I suppose just on the box ticking one, I think if an organization just looks at sustainability as a compliance obligation, I think they're missing a huge opportunity for that business. And I go back to the piece on the stakeholder mapping. I mean, if you actually look at your stakeholders, and in terms of opportunities, it's looking at markets, it's looking at customer preferences, it's looking at the ultimate market for your product. So I think when you do that type of research in a meaningful way, I think it will highlight the opportunities that present itself. I go back to a point that was made earlier on. I think one of the challenges for boards is they don't know what they don't know, and I think education is really, really important. So I think whether that's in-house expertise within the senior management team or whether it's external expertise, I think the board needs to educate itself, because we all know as directors, ignorance is in the defence. Should educate themselves on the broader sustainability agenda, but also how it impacts on the business that they're responsible for as a board. So I think education for me, if I was given a takeaway to people, is don't sit on your hands, because this is something that is happening. Businesses need to fundamentally change their business model, and it's important to understand as a board how that's going to impact on the business where you are a director.
Great, thank you, Barry. And last word to you, Margaret.
I think, Orla, for me, it is know your purpose and define it with precision, I guess. Companies, boards need to be clear about how their companies create value for shareholders in the provision of a product or service, and how their sustainabilities contribute to kind of wider economy, society, community. They need to be clear about what their companies also or cannot do from a sustainability point of view to make the world a better place, and what is the responsibility of what I call the visible hand of public policy. And we need more engagement. You spoke about communication, Orla. We need more engagement through many forums, including chambers of commerce and so on, to say what we need policy to help us with, and what we need, what we can actually do as organizations in our own right. And too many companies, investors, and even politicians conflate those two things. So they would be my parting words, Orla.
Lovely. Thank you all. So that concludes the discussion part, but you'll probably have noticed that kind of one recurring theme came up an awful lot today in the discussion, and that was the need for professionals to upskill and educate themselves on this area. And some of you out there in the audience may be looking for ways to do that now in a flexible manner, while you're trying to balance your work and your personal commitments and everything else. And if you are interested in educating yourself a bit more about sustainability and upskilling in that area, you might be interested in learning a little bit more about our MSc in Sustainability Leadership, which we offer here in University of Galway. So this program is actually tailored for working professionals, and it's delivered primarily online. So it allows for that flexible mode of learning, but there are 2 immersive in-person blocks each year. And during these blocks, participants get the benefit of company site visits, engaging with organizations, experiencing firsthand how organizations are actually doing this transition on the ground. And wonderfully, for those of us who are involved in the program, one of those in-person blocks is in the beautiful region of Bologna in North Italy. So it is quite a nice experience to learn from some of these organizations in other regions as well. So if you are interested in learning anything more about that program, please feel free to scan the QR code, which is appearing there on the slide in front of you now, or indeed reach out to me directly, orla.linehan@universityofgalway.ie, with any questions. Other than that, all that's left for me to do is firstly thank my fantastic panelists this morning for your wonderful insights. I certainly learned lots from the discussion. I get this feeling that I could do with learning lots more. I think we could have had to keep the discussion going for another hour. I think the message here is to keep talking and keep these discussions going and learning from each other. Lastly, I would like to thank all of you, the attendees, for joining this morning. Thank you for your engagement, your very interesting questions, and we really look forward to meeting you again at another Thinking Beyond event soon, hosted by J.E. Cairnes School of Business and Economics. Thank you all, and have a lovely weekend, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.